Hey guys, tonight we begin with a cozy little topic that, on the surface, might not seem very cozy at all. We're going to talk about sleep. Yes, that most basic, most necessary human function, but not just any sleep. We're going all the way back to the Middle Ages, to those grand, imposing stone castles with their towering walls, drafty windows, and let's be honest, absolutely miserable temperatures in winter. So, if you've already got a blanket, maybe grab an extra one. Dim the lights, sink into your bed, and let's gently float into the cold, sometimes awkward, but oddly fascinating world of medieval slumber. Now, when most people imagine a medieval castle, they picture knights, battles, and perhaps a suspiciously smiling king. But very few of us think about how the people inside those stone fortresses actually slept. And the truth is, it was cold, really cold. Stone walls don't exactly keep in heat. They don't hug you back. And fireplaces, while impressive, were usually few and far between, leaving many rooms bitterly chilled. So how did anyone manage to drift off to sleep without shivering themselves into a fitful night? Let's explore. First, let's consider the basics. Castle architecture. Medieval castles were built for defense, not comfort. Thick stone walls, narrow windows, and high towers meant that these buildings could withstand sieges, but also that they retained winter's icy bite. Imagine a room with walls that are easily 2 or 3 feet thick, a single fireplace in the corner, and a drafty window letting in the scent of the outside snow. It might sound romantic in a storybook, but in reality, it was more like living in a giant stone refrigerator. People were, naturally, inventive. They understood, at least intuitively, that sleeping directly on stone floors was not going to do much for warmth. Enter straw mattresses. Or, in wealthier households, feather mattresses. Straw was cheap, plentiful, and it insulated reasonably well. People would pile it high, sometimes on top of wooden bed frames, sometimes directly on the floor, and cover themselves with whatever blankets they had. And when I say blankets, I mean layers. Medieval beds often had multiple sheets, woolen blankets, and sometimes furs. The wealthier the household, the more extravagant the layers. But even then, it was nothing like the soft, fluffy bedding we're used to today. Of course, furs were reserved for the elite. Commoners often had to make do with what they could find: straw, sacks, or thin wool blankets. And let's not forget the coldest of all times, winter nights. Castles might be drafty all year round, but winter could be brutal. Ice on the floors, frozen windows, and the smell of wet stone permeating every chamber. This is where bed curtains came into play. You might have seen these in movies. Heavy fabric draped around a bed. They weren't just decorative. Bed curtains acted as a barrier, keeping the cold drafts away and trapping body heat. Think of them as medieval climate control. It was a primitive version, but it worked well enough to keep people from literally freezing. Another important adaptation was body heat sharing. People slept close together. This was practical in many senses. In addition to family members, servants and guards might share rooms for warmth. Even kings and queens relied on the heat generated by attendants. And yes, sometimes animals were brought inside for extra warmth. Small dogs, cats, even pigs in some rural castles could serve as living hot water bottles. This might sound odd to modern sensibilities, but it was quite effective. Interestingly, the concept of personal space was very different in medieval times. Today, we might flinch at the idea of sleeping several people in a single room or sharing beds with strangers or animals. Back then, it was normal, functional, and frankly cozy in its own strange way. And there's evidence that people even slept in shifts in some castles. Guards would alternate between watching over the castle and trying to grab a few hours of sleep, while servants might occupy empty corners of the Great Hall. It was a practical arrangement. The castle never truly slept, and warmth could be shared. Let's float over to another aspect: nighttime routines. It wasn't just about piling up straw and furs. People were strategic. Before climbing into bed, they might have heated bricks in the fireplace and placed them under the blankets. It sounds a little dangerous, but it was effective. Some would even wear layers of clothing to bed: linen shirts, woolen trousers, and sometimes multiple tunics. And yes, this meant that many medieval people went to bed fully dressed, something we might consider uncomfortable today. But necessity dictated comfort in a very different way. Interestingly, superstition played a role in sleep hygiene too. People believed that certain nights were more dangerous than others. Cold nights might also be associated with evil spirits, witches, or wandering ghosts. So, extra precautions were taken. Beds were enclosed with curtains. Charms or amulets were sometimes placed near the head. And people slept with one eye slightly open, metaphorically, if not literally. Whether this actually helped anyone sleep is doubtful, but it's a fascinating reflection of the medieval mind trying to make sense of discomfort. Even the elite experienced peculiar sleeping habits. Royals and high-ranking nobles often had bedchambers that doubled as offices, sitting rooms, or ceremonial spaces. These rooms could be massive, with high ceilings and enormous fireplaces. But massive rooms meant more air to heat and more air to chill. Even with servants stoking the fire, it was a constant battle against the cold. That's where the design of the bed itself became important. Some beds were built with high wooden panels and curtains, almost like a small room within a room, designed to trap heat. Some historical records even describe people crawling under their blankets with hot bricks tucked around them. Not something you'd see in a modern sleep manual, but quite effective. And what about comfort? Well, comfort was relative. Imagine sleeping on a straw mattress, sharing space with siblings, attendants, or pets, and hearing the wind whistle through stone walls. Your definition of cozy might differ, but medieval people adapted. They learned to layer, to insulate, and to use body heat wisely. And remember, they didn't have central heating or hot water bottles. Every little trick counted. Let's touch on hygiene, which, for medieval sleepers, was another factor affecting sleep quality. Baths were rare, and people didn't change sheets daily. Straw mattresses would accumulate dust, insects, and sometimes rodents. Feather mattresses were susceptible to mites. This might seem unpleasant to us, but it was normal, and people developed strategies. Some would sleep on top of sheets and blankets, leaving the straw below mostly untouched. Others relied on herbs, like lavender or rosemary, tucked into bedding to mask smells and repel insects. It was primitive but functional. By now, you might be thinking, why didn't everyone just freeze? And the answer is adaptation and practicality. Humans are remarkably resilient. The cold, drafty castles demanded innovation. Bed curtains, layered blankets, hot bricks, body heat, and strategic clothing all contributed to a workable sleep environment. People adjusted their expectations, and what might seem miserable to us was simply life for them. As the night deepened, life in the castle became quieter, though never silent. Guards patrolled, dogs barked, and the occasional groan of settling stone echoed through halls. People shifted under their layers, shared warmth, and found moments of comfort in small luxuries, a soft fur, a warm brick, or simply the presence of loved ones. Sleep was both a necessity and a ritual, carefully managed despite the bitter cold. And so, as we drift along with this gentle narrative, imagine yourself wrapped in straw and furs, lying beneath a canopy of heavy curtains, the wind whispering through castle walls. Imagine the flicker of the fire across stone, the soft breathing of companions nearby, and the slow, methodical rhythm of life in a medieval castle. It wasn't luxurious by modern standards, but it worked. And as we'll explore in the next part, there are even stranger, more inventive, and sometimes slightly absurd methods that people used to keep warm and sleep through the night in those drafty fortresses. Welcome back, friends. Let's continue our gentle journey into the chilly, stone-filled world of medieval castles, where sleeping through the night was as much about strategy as it was about exhaustion. In part 1, we wandered through basic sleeping habits, straw mattresses, layered blankets, and the occasional hot brick. Tonight, we'll float a bit deeper, exploring the very structures that made medieval sleep both challenging and, oddly enough, fascinating. So, castles. They were impressive, weren't they? High walls, battlements, arrow slits, massive gates, all designed to repel invaders. But for the average sleeper inside, castles were less impressive and more drafty. The thick stone walls might seem insulating, but stone has a way of pulling heat away rather efficiently. One could argue that medieval architects had a singular goal: make the castle nearly impossible to storm and leave its inhabitants shivering in the process. Not intentionally cruel, of course, just a byproduct of prioritizing defense over comfort. One important feature of castles was the tower. Towers were tall, vertical spaces meant for defense and visibility. They had narrow windows, good for archers, bad for warmth. Anyone assigned to a room in a tower had to contend with wind that seemed to gust right through the stone. The term drafty doesn't even begin to cover it. People in towers had to be creative. Heavy curtains, strategically placed furs, and layering became a form of art. And sometimes, guards or attendants would rotate in, sharing warmth during long, cold nights. The tower rooms were not luxurious retreats. They were endurance challenges. Next, consider great halls. These were massive open spaces where feasts were held, laws were pronounced, and servants scurried around tending to the needs of their lord. By night, some inhabitants slept in these halls, particularly guards or lower-ranking staff. Sleeping in a great hall was its own adventure. The ceilings were high, the fireplaces often far apart, and the floors unforgivingly cold. Again, straw bedding and layered clothing were essential. Some records even suggest people slept in long rows of communal beds, making the most of shared warmth. It might not have been cozy, but at least no one was completely alone with the cold. Windows. Castles had windows, but don't imagine the sun-drenched panes of modern homes. These were narrow slits designed to allow archers to shoot out while keeping arrows from shooting. In some were covered with oiled cloth, others with rudimentary glass in wealthier homes. The result? Minimal heat retention. Anyone sleeping near a window had to take precautions. Bed curtains, extra furs, and sometimes the practice of positioning the bed away from the coldest walls. And still, during winter nights, the chill would creep into every corner. Now, let's glide to a slightly stranger aspect: flooring. Stone floors were unforgiving. Some castles had wooden floors in certain chambers, but mostly it was bare stone. People were inventive. Straw mats, rushes, or hay were laid down, sometimes covering the floor entirely. These served multiple purposes: insulation, comfort, and, unintentionally, a trap for insects. We'll revisit that delightful topic later. For now, just imagine lying on straw, with the echo of stone halls surrounding you, wind whispering through gaps, and the faint scent of smoke from distant fireplaces. Not quite the spa retreat of your dreams. Speaking of fireplaces, they were the unsung heroes of medieval sleep. Fires provided warmth, but castles were large, and a single fireplace couldn't heat the entire structure. Wealthier residents had multiple hearths, but most people relied on localized warmth: a fire in a corner, heated bricks tucked under blankets, or the occasional hot stone placed strategically in a bed. And let's not forget the chimney effect. Large, open hearths drew cold air through the building, even as they provided warmth. The balance was delicate, sometimes frustrating, but somehow people adapted. And here's where we meet a peculiar medieval invention: the bedbox. For those unfamiliar, a bedbox was essentially a wooden enclosure around a bed. Think of it as a small, warm cave. Curtains could be drawn all around, trapping heat generated by body warmth and, if you were lucky, a nearby fire. This design was particularly favored by the nobility, who were sensitive to drafts and, in some cases, had health issues that required extra warmth. The bedbox was a humble, yet brilliant solution to the constant battle against cold. Let's float over to another curious method: sleeping in shifts or clusters. Guards, attendants, and servants often had to remain awake for safety or duty. This meant that while one group rested, another patrolled. Sleeping in clusters ensured that body heat was maximized. Even for non-working members of the household, sleeping close together was a matter of efficiency. It was not just warmth. It was a social, practical, and occasionally awkward arrangement. And of course, animals played a starring role. Medieval cats, dogs, and sometimes even pigs were brought indoors, sharing beds or rooms for warmth. This might sound strange now, but it was an effective, if smelly, solution. In castles without central heating, or even sufficient hearths, every little bit of heat counted. A small dog curled at your feet could make the difference between a tolerable night and a shivery one. By now, it's worth mentioning clothing as sleep armor. People didn't just layer blankets, they layered clothes: linen shirts, woolen tunics, and sometimes extra layers of undergarments were standard. Some wealthy individuals even had dedicated nightcaps, which helped prevent heat loss through the head. Wearing multiple garments to bed might sound uncomfortable today, but in a freezing room, it was essential. And for those who could afford it, furs added another layer of insulation. Let's drift a little into the psychological side. The cold was constant, but so was human adaptation. People became attuned to the rhythm of night and fire. Sleep wasn't always deep. Often it was broken by the need to stoke fires or adjust bedding, but there was a calm in routine. The night, though harsh, followed predictable patterns, and even in discomfort, people found ways to rest, using clever tricks, social arrangements, and a kind of stoic endurance that is hard to imagine today. Finally, let's pause on the cultural perspective of cold. In modern times, we might think cold is unpleasant, something to fight relentlessly. In medieval times, cold was part of life. People dressed for it, arranged their beds for it, and even structured their social lives around it. There was a rhythm to adaptation, a choreography of blankets, beds, curtains, and companions. And yes, despite drafts, icy floors, and occasional winter winds seeping through arrow slits, people slept, they survived. They even thrived in the strange, rugged way that medieval humans always seemed to manage. As we settle into this narrative, imagine the faint flicker of torchlight on stone walls, the soft shuffle of attendants adjusting straw beds, and the subtle warmth of a small dog curled at the foot of a bed. Picture the draft whispering through the tower, the fire casting shadows across the room, and the human determination to simply rest. It's not glamorous, but it's strangely comforting, isn't it? And with that gentle scene in mind, we're ready to drift further into the next layer of medieval sleep. The beds themselves, the fascinating quirks of mattresses, furs, and the slightly absurd measures people took to ensure warmth. From the simplest straw mat to the grandest royal bedbox, we'll see how necessity truly shaped the art of sleep in cold, drafty castles. Welcome back, dear listeners. So far, we've gently explored the chilling embrace of medieval castle architecture, the clever but modest ways people fought drafts, and the social strategies that kept body heat circulating. Tonight, we'll drift into the very heart of sleep, the bed itself. What did people lie on? What covered them? And how did royalty and commoners alike endure the often icy nights in their castles? Let's settle in and take it slow. First, let's consider straw mattresses. Most medieval folk, especially commoners, slept on piles of straw, tucked into simple bed frames, or even directly on the floor. Straw was abundant, cheap, and surprisingly insulating. But it came with side effects. It was itchy, uneven, and prone to attracting insects, fleas, mites, and occasionally rodents. Yes, a stray mouse or two was not unheard of. People tolerated this as a matter of course. Hygiene wasn't what we consider essential today. It was about survival and practicality. A straw bed kept you off the stone floor, added a little warmth, and allowed you to rest your weary bones after a day of labor. That was success. The wealthier classes, however, had a different story. Nobles and royals could afford feather mattresses, sometimes multiple layers of feathers in a wooden frame. These offered much more comfort and insulation than straw, but also had quirks. Feathers would clump, shift, or poke through worn covers. They were expensive, so they were often passed down or reused, which meant cleaning was minimal. Some beds were stuffed with down, feathers from geese or swans, carefully layered to maximize softness. For someone unaccustomed to such a bed, it might have felt luxurious, but the cold stone walls of a castle still limited the sense of warmth. Next, let's talk about bed curtains. We've mentioned them before, but their role deserves more attention. Beds in castles were not just places to sleep. They were miniature sanctuaries. Curtains surrounded the bed on all sides, creating a cozy enclosure. The fabric trapped heat from the sleeper's body, and, if you were lucky, from nearby heated bricks. Curtains also offered privacy in communal sleeping arrangements, and, for the nobility, a way to signal status. Think of them as a medieval climate control and social signaling hybrid, not perfect, but ingenious. Interestingly, bedding materials went beyond just straw, feathers, or wool. Medieval people used linen sheets, sometimes layered, sometimes lightly scented with herbs. Lavender, rosemary, and other fragrant plants were tucked under pillows or blankets, serving multiple purposes, masking odors, repelling insects, and possibly calming the mind before sleep. Some accounts describe people tucking herbs directly into their mattresses, creating a fragrant but slightly prickly bed. Not quite spa-like, but effective for their time. Now, let's float to royal sleeping habits. Always a fascinating, slightly absurd aspect of medieval life. Kings and queens had enormous beds, often elevated on platforms, draped with heavy curtains and layered with blankets, furs, and feathers. Some royal beds even had multiple mattresses stacked atop each other. Sleeping was a ritual. It involved attendants arranging layers, ensuring heated bricks were placed, and sometimes even tucking in pets for extra warmth. Imagine a king, fully dressed in night garments, lying beneath a canopy, attended by servants adjusting every blanket and feather. It sounds elaborate, and it was, but it was a methodical approach to surviving cold nights. The height of the bed mattered too. Elevated beds protected sleepers from the cold floor and potential rodents. Some records mention steps leading up to beds, making climbing into the warmth a deliberate act. Being high off the floor also allowed air to circulate beneath the mattress, reducing dampness and the lingering chill of stone floors. Every detail, from height to fabric, contributed to the medieval pursuit of warmth. And then there's the curious case of bed sharing. Nobles often slept with attendants or guards in the same room for warmth and protection. Children frequently shared beds with parents or siblings. Even pets joined in. The modern notion of private, individual sleep spaces was largely unknown. Instead, people embraced practical closeness, and in doing so, shared both warmth and occasional oddities. Snoring, body heat, and the faint scent of straw hygiene, of course, added another layer to this sleep story. Bed linens were not changed frequently. Feather mattresses were fluffed, straw beds shaken. But thorough cleaning was rare. People relied on herbs to combat odor and pests. They accepted minor discomforts as part of life, and these minor annoyances rarely prevented sleep entirely. The key was layering, warmth, and adaptability. Let's drift to another oddity: the use of hot bricks and stones. In colder castles, people would heat stones in the fireplace and carefully place them under or near blankets. Some accounts even suggest stones were wrapped in cloth to prevent burns. This was an early, if rudimentary, form of thermal regulation. It wasn't perfect. Occasionally, a hot stone would be forgotten, creating an unexpected burn or a sudden puff of heat in the middle of the night. But overall, it worked. Medieval people also understood strategic body positioning. Sleeping curled up, with arms and legs close to the body, conserved warmth. Sleeping with a companion or animal further amplified this effect. Some records indicate that people would even place their heads toward the fire, if possible, to take advantage of residual warmth. It was an intuitive, low-tech science of heat retention, refined over generations. For those interested in social psychology, the nighttime presence of servants is noteworthy. In many castles, servants slept nearby, ready to assist with fire, water, or emergencies. This proximity served a dual purpose. It provided warmth and ensured that the household could function smoothly through the night. Nobility slept surrounded by humans, pets, and occasionally even hot bricks. Life in a medieval castle was a constant dance between comfort, practicality, and the limitations imposed by stone and draft. As we drift further, consider the role of superstition and tradition. Some people believe that sleeping in certain positions or near specific objects could ward off evil spirits. Bed curtains were not just for warmth. They were thought to offer protection. Some nights, the presence of amulets, charms, or protective herbs was as important psychologically as the physical insulation they provided. Sleeping was not merely biological. It was cultural, social, and in its own quiet way, ritualistic. Finally, let's pause on the rhythm of medieval sleep. Unlike our modern, often interrupted routines, medieval sleep was cyclical and communal. People slept, woke to tend fires, fed animals, or checked on family members, and returned to bed. Sleep wasn't always continuous, but it was functional. It met the essential human need, while adapting to environmental challenges and social expectations. And in doing so, it shaped habits, architecture, and domestic life across generations. So tonight, as we imagine the creak of straw under body weight, the soft whisper of curtains, and the faint warmth of a nearby fire or animal companion, we get a sense of medieval ingenuity. People didn't just survive the cold. They developed a whole art of sleep. It was practical, inventive, and sometimes strange, but it worked. And it's a reminder that comfort is relative, warmth is precious, and even in drafty stone castles, humans found ways to rest. Next, in part 4, we'll gently drift into the most eccentric side of medieval sleeping: royal rituals, odd habits, and the personal quirks of kings and queens. From in-bed etiquette to the strange, often amusing routines surrounding bedtime, we'll explore how the elite made sleeping both functional and a subtle status display. Welcome back, dear listeners. Tonight, we drift into a world of grandeur, oddity, and ritual, the bedrooms of medieval royalty. If part 3 introduced you to the practicalities of medieval beds, bedding, and warmth, part 4 invites you to observe how the elite added ceremony, eccentricity, and sometimes absurdity to the simple act of sleeping. So, settle in, get comfortable under your own blankets, and let's glide through the quirks of kings, queens, and their attendants. Let's start with royal bedtime routines, which were more elaborate than anything most of us experience today. For nobles, going to bed was almost like a ceremonial event. Curtains were drawn, servants adjusted blankets and feather mattresses, and the heated bricks were strategically placed. In some castles, attendants even helped the monarch into bed, adjusting robes and linens to ensure maximum comfort. The process could take several minutes, or, in some cases, much longer. You might imagine a king trying to relax after a long day of politics, nights, and meetings, being fussed over by several attendants while maintaining a stiff posture. Not exactly restful in the early stages, but by the time they settled in, warmth and comfort were maximized. Interestingly, bed height and bed size were symbolic as much as practical royal beds were massive, often elevated on wooden platforms. High beds protected from cold floors, pests, and drafts. But they also conveyed status. The taller and more elaborate the bed, the more important the sleeper. Some records mention steps leading up to beds, which attendants would help guide the royal onto. Can you imagine climbing 5 or 6 steps, fully dressed in night garments, with servants fluffing every pillow and adjusting every blanket? Slightly absurd, yes, but effective. Now, let's touch on the curious practice of in-bed meetings. Some monarchs conducted business, received visitors, or even held informal court from the comfort of their bed. This wasn't necessarily for warmth. It was about status, convenience, and projecting authority. Of course, sleeping under such conditions was rarely uninterrupted. Attendants would serve drinks, adjust the fire, or deliver messages, all while the royal tried to find a comfortable sleeping position. In our modern, quiet bedrooms, this seems strange, but in the medieval world, beds were both throne and sanctuary. Animals, again, played a key role. Royal pets were often present at bedtime, both for companionship and warmth. Cats curled on feather mattresses, small dogs nestled near feet, and sometimes even larger animals were allowed in bedchambers, not in the bed itself, but close enough to share their body heat. The smell, of course, could be overwhelming, but comfort, warmth, and ritual outweighed modern ideas of hygiene. Then there were the nocturnal habits of royalty, which could seem downright peculiar. Some slept fully dressed in layers of night garments, while others removed clothing entirely. Some kept their beds meticulously organized, with feather mattresses fluffed and straw layers replaced regularly, while others accepted minor messiness as natural. Some royals even had multiple beds in a single room, choosing which one to sleep in depending on temperature, mood, or superstition. Speaking of superstition, bedtime often involved protective rituals. Amulets, charms, and herbs were common. Lavender, rosemary, and other fragrant plants were tucked under pillows or sewn into sheets. The purpose wasn't just scent. It was believed to ward off evil spirits, bad dreams, or illness. Some monarchs insisted on sleeping in certain positions or near certain objects for protection. Again, these practices might seem odd, but they were part of a broader medieval understanding of comfort and security. Of course, the elite weren't immune to strange sleep quirks. Historical records reveal monarchs who preferred extreme warmth, using multiple blankets, furs, and even heated bricks. Others preferred cooler nights, leaving windows open despite the bitter cold. Some kings and queens slept lightly, waking frequently to check on attendants, guards, or family members. Sleep was rarely just biological. It was intertwined with power, status, and ritual. Let's float to the role of attendants. Sleeping in a royal chamber was rarely solitary. Attendants slept in the room to ensure that the fire was maintained, that the bed was comfortable, and that the monarch was safe. Sometimes, attendants even shared the bed for warmth or practical reasons. This meant that human body heat was a resource carefully managed. Sleeping in the proximity of others wasn't just social. It was a deliberate adaptation to cold, drafts, and castle life. Now, a subtle but fascinating detail: the layering of mattresses. Some royal beds had multiple layers, straw at the bottom, feathers in the middle, and a top layer of soft cloth or linens. Heated bricks could be placed between layers, adding warmth. In some cases, blankets were tucked in meticulously around the sleeper's body, creating a cocoon of heat. These beds were not just furniture. They were instruments of survival. Even the positioning of beds in rooms was strategic. Beds were often placed away from drafty windows or near fireplaces. Canopies and curtains were carefully arranged to trap heat. In some castles, multiple fireplaces were used to warm key rooms, but the bed remained the focal point for retaining warmth. Every detail, from height to fabric, was considered in the battle against the cold. And, of course, there was the humorously human side: kings snoring, attendants tripping over blankets, pets wandering across mattresses, heated bricks shifting unexpectedly, all added subtle chaos to an otherwise controlled ritual. Sleep was precious, but not always serene. And yet through all of this, medieval people, including royalty, managed to rest. They adapted, innovated, and ritualized sleep in ways both practical and slightly absurd. Finally, let's touch on the overlap of social hierarchy and sleep. While royalty had beds that were tall, heavily curtained, and layered with furs and feathers, lower-ranking nobles had simpler arrangements. Commoners and servants often slept in straw beds, sometimes in communal halls, sometimes on the floor, and always with practicality in mind. Still, the same principles applied. Layers, warmth, body heat, and clever use of materials. Sleep in medieval castles was a blend of biology, architecture, and social structure. As we imagine the flicker of torchlight across tall wooden bedposts, the hush of attendants arranging blankets, and the faint warmth of a small dog curled at the foot of a bed, we begin to see medieval sleep as an orchestrated dance, part comfort, part ritual, and entirely adapted to a world without modern heating. It wasn't luxurious in the modern sense, but it was effective. In Part 5, we'll gently explore the sleeping habits of servants, guards, and commoners, looking at how people without royal privilege endured the drafty, icy halls of castles. From communal beds to shifts of nighttime vigilance, we'll see how practicality shaped nightly rest for everyone else in the medieval fortress. Welcome back, dear listeners. So far, we've floated through the architecture of castles, the curious inventions designed to retain warmth, and the elaborate routines of royalty. Tonight, we drift down a level, from grand chambers to the more humble, practical sleeping arrangements of servants, guards, and commoners. Here, survival and efficiency shape sleep in ways both inventive and at times slightly uncomfortable. Let's begin with castle guards. These were the unsung heroes of the night, tasked with keeping the fortress safe from invaders, bandits, or wandering animals. Guards often slept in shifts. While one group patrolled the battlements, another tried to rest. Sleeping in a castle tower was challenging. Narrow windows let in cold air, stone floors were unforgiving, and minimal bedding was provided. Yet guards had a strategy. Straw mats, layers of clothing, and occasionally heated bricks allowed them to survive long, chilly nights. Their sleep was functional, short bursts of rest between vigilant rounds. Efficiency outweighed comfort. Moving to servants, their sleep was often communal. Barracks-like arrangements or shared chambers meant dozens of people might occupy a single space. Beds were simple, straw-filled mattresses, perhaps layered with thin blankets. Furs were rare, often reserved for the household's elite. In these rooms, body heat was essential. People slept close together, sharing warmth in a practical, almost mechanical way. Privacy was minimal, but warmth was maximized. It was a different kind of comfort, born of necessity rather than luxury. Commoners living in castles or nearby estates often slept on the floor or on low straw beds. For them, survival meant layering blankets, wearing multiple garments, and sometimes even sharing beds with family members or small animals. Cold stone or wooden floors were mitigated with rushes or mats, occasionally sprinkled with aromatic herbs to mask odors and repel pests. Nights were long, dark, and drafty, but human ingenuity prevailed. Interestingly, sleeping in shifts wasn't just for guards. Servants often staggered rest periods to tend to fires, food, or animals. In castles, the night never truly ended. Someone was always awake to maintain order, heat, and safety. This created a rhythm, alternating periods of rest and vigilance, punctuated by faint noises, the shuffle of straw, a whispered conversation, or the occasional bark of a dog. Sleep became a communal choreography, dictated by necessity. Animals were, again, integral. Cats and dogs roamed chambers, sometimes sharing beds, sometimes curled in corners. They weren't just companions. They were natural heaters and pest deterrents. Their warmth helped stave off frostbite or discomfort, particularly in rooms with minimal bedding. Some castles even tolerated small livestock nearby for this reason. The smell, naturally, could be overwhelming, but warmth outweighed olfactory displeasure. Another adaptation was clothing as insulation. Commoners rarely had access to heated bricks or multi-layered furs. Instead, they relied on garments. Linen shirts, woolen tunics, and multiple layers of clothing were essential. Sleeping fully dressed might seem uncomfortable now, but for a person lying on a straw mattress in a cold stone room, it was the difference between tolerable sleep and restless shivering. We should also consider the communal hygiene factor. Beds weren't changed frequently, straw was reused, blankets were patched, and linens were minimal. People relied on herbs and rushes for cleanliness and comfort. Insects, rodents, and dust were constant companions, but humanity's adaptability was impressive. Despite discomfort, people rested, often lightly, waking intermittently to tend fires, adjust bedding, or deal with minor disturbances. For guards, another challenge was nighttime duty patrols. Observation and the occasional disturbance meant that sleep was often interrupted. Strategically placed bedding, layered clothing, and proximity to warmth allowed them to maximize rest during brief periods. Shift patterns were essential. One guard slept while another watched, and the cycle continued through the long night. It was a system designed to sustain both security and sleep. However fragmented, children and apprentices in castles had yet another experience. They often shared beds with siblings or other children, sometimes in dormitory-style arrangements. Straw mattresses were stacked close together, blankets were shared, and warmth was communal. Parents or guardians occasionally slept nearby, both for comfort and supervision. Life in these arrangements was practical. Sleep was not luxurious, but it was functional, providing rest for the next day's labor. The role of fires cannot be overstated. While royal chambers might have had multiple hearths, commoners and servants often relied on a single fireplace. Heated stones, proximity to co-sleepers, and layering were essential to combat the cold. Smoke, of course, could be an issue, but medieval people understood its balance with warmth and survival. Sleep was negotiated between comfort, warmth, and practicality. Finally, let's consider psychological adaptation. The cold, drafts, and occasional pests were ever present, yet humans are remarkably adaptable. Through communal arrangements, layered clothing, clever bedding, and the shared warmth of animals and family members, medieval people found ways to rest. Their approach to sleep was pragmatic, social, and shaped by environmental necessity. Nights might be cold, short, or interrupted, but rest was achieved nonetheless. As we imagine a commoner's night in a castle, a room crowded with straw mattresses, the shuffle of bodies, the quiet warmth of a dog at someone's feet, we can appreciate the ingenuity and adaptability of medieval life. Sleep was not about luxury. It was about survival, comfort within limits, and the shared human experience of enduring cold together. In Part 6, we will drift toward the final aspects of medieval sleep: nighttime rituals, superstitions, fire safety, and the subtle, quiet ways people ensured warmth and rest before morning. It's the slow, gentle conclusion to our exploration of life in drafty, cold castles, designed to leave you relaxed and ready for sleep yourself. Welcome back, dear listeners. Tonight, we drift into the final, quiet chapter of our exploration: the subtle, slow, and often slightly peculiar ways medieval people ensured sleep in their drafty castles. In previous parts, we've explored architecture, bedding, royal routines, and the communal strategies of servants and guards. Now, we turn our attention to rituals, superstitions, fire safety, and the delicate balance of warmth and rest. Let's gently glide through the last hours of medieval nights. First, a word about nighttime rituals. Sleep in a castle was not simply lying down and closing your eyes. For many, it was a carefully managed process. Attendants adjusted blankets, arranged mattresses, placed heated bricks under furs, and sometimes tucked pets close for extra warmth. Royals might spend time reading letters, meditating, or even conducting small business in bed before finally lying down. For commoners, the ritual was simpler but no less deliberate: layering clothing, arranging bedding, and gathering loved ones or animals nearby. These small actions were essential to surviving the night. Superstitions were everywhere. People believed that evil spirits, witches, and mischievous forces prowled at night. Bed curtains weren't just for warmth. They were shields against malevolent eyes. Herbs tucked under pillows weren't just fragrant. They were charms against nightmares and illness. Some medieval folk slept with protective amulets near their heads, while others recited small prayers or blessings before lying down. Sleep was both a practical and spiritual endeavor. Calm rituals helped ease minds, creating a psychological warmth to accompany the physical one. Fire safety was another quiet concern. Fires provided warmth, but uncontrolled flames could destroy a castle. Careful tending of hearths, strategic placement of hot bricks, and the vigilance of attendants ensured that the danger of fire did not outweigh the benefits of heat. Some medieval instructions even suggest keeping water nearby or having fire-ready servants on standby. It was an early form of precautionary planning. Sleep was necessary, but safety was paramount. Let's pause on the timing and rhythm of sleep. Medieval nights were long, and people often adopted a segmented sleep pattern. One might sleep for a few hours, wake to tend a fire, check on family or animals, or simply adjust blankets and mattresses, and then return to bed. This segmented rest was functional, aligned with the household's needs, and dictated by environmental realities. While it may not match our modern notions of uninterrupted 8-hour sleep, it was effective and, importantly, restful enough to sustain energy for the day ahead. Animals, once again, played a crucial role in these final hours of the night. Dogs and cats, sometimes small livestock, contributed warmth, companionship, and a subtle sense of security. Sleeping close to these animals was practical and comforting, a tactile connection that added another layer to the medieval approach to rest. Even in cold, drafty rooms, the gentle warmth of a curled animal could make a world of difference. Let's drift to the final moments before waking people. Often rose with the first hints of light, or sometimes earlier if duty called. Guards took over watch shifts, attendants stoked the hearth, and children awoke to begin chores. Even in these early hours, the care devoted to comfort and warmth the previous night mattered. Heated bricks, layered bedding, and carefully arranged furs ensured that the night had been as tolerable as possible. It was a delicate orchestration of human ingenuity, adaptation, and endurance. Sleep in a medieval castle, then, was a blend of necessity, ritual, and social structure. From straw mattresses to elaborate royal canopies, from shared warmth to superstitious charms, from heated bricks to strategic layering of clothing, every detail mattered. People adapted to cold, drafts, pests, and social obligations, creating a system of rest that might seem strange today, but was entirely practical. Even the minor inconveniences, snoring companions, shifting animals, occasional stray pests, and the whisper of wind through stone walls, were accepted as part of life. They were not interruptions, but rather companions in the quiet rhythm of medieval existence. Life in a castle demanded resilience, and sleep, though challenging, was a mastered art. So as we drift gently toward the end of this narrative, picture yourself lying beneath a canopy, surrounded by furs, blankets, or even fellow humans and animals. Hear the soft murmur of attendants, the faint crackle of fire, and the subtle whisper of wind through stone. Imagine the slow, deliberate choreography of medieval sleep, layering, warmth, rituals, and protective charms, all coming together to create a night that, while cold, was tolerable and restorative. And now, as we close this exploration, let's reflect on the resilience of human adaptation. Across centuries, in castles both grand and humble, people found ways to rest, to survive, and to endure the chill of stone walls. Comfort was relative, warmth was precious, and sleep, even under difficult conditions, was a carefully cultivated part of daily life. May this slow, gentle journey leave you relaxed, perhaps a little drowsy, and appreciative of the warmth and convenience we often take for granted. Today, medieval sleep was not luxurious, but it was effective, it was pragmatic, it was quietly ingenious. And in imagining it, we can drift toward our own rest with a sense of calm, comfort, and historical perspective. Good night, dear listeners. May your blankets be warm, your pillows soft, and your sleep uninterrupted, though hopefully less drafty than that of a medieval castle dweller.